In the heart of Manhattan's swirling nightlife, an unassuming waitress named Isabelle Rise serves cocktails to the city's power elite at Le Palais Noir, a restaurant so exclusive it doesn't even have a sign on the door. One evening, a poised yet mysterious millionaire named Alexander Harrington arrives, commanding every gaze with his regal bearing and whispered reputation. Yet beneath his polished demeanor, rumors of a dark family history drift through the corridors of New York society. Intrigued by odd clues in his casual conversation and cryptic phone calls, Isabelle soon finds herself on a collision course with Alexander's secret past, one that could transform both their futures forever. Le Palais Noir was not your typical upscale restaurant. Tucked into a quiet side street near Fifth Avenue, its discreet black facade and ornate iron doors offered little indication of the grandeur inside. Evening diners passed beneath the flicker of gaslit sconces, an extravagant homage to a bygone era. Within, the ceiling soared, lined with Gothic arches and softly lit chandeliers that bathed velvet banquettes in a golden glow. Every detail from the plush carpets to the vintage decanters whispered wealth. Isabelle Reyes navigated this lavish landscape with practiced ease. At 23, she'd been working here for nearly a year. Although she was no stranger to Manhattan's opulent enclaves, she had grown up in a modest Queens neighborhood. Her upbringing taught her resilience, humility, and a fierce curiosity about the powerful individuals who roamed these corridors of privilege. She was both mystified by and inured to the nightly parade of celebrities, moguls, and political figures that frequented Le Palais Noir. Yet there was a certain thrill in observing them at their most unguarded moments, sipping rare cognacs and making hushed deals under the restaurant's cloistered ambience. That night, she had no idea her life was about to pivot. In the back hallway, she polished silverware while listening to two of the restaurant's senior servers gossip about a reclusive millionaire. Supposedly, he had inherited a fortune under suspicious circumstances. Some said his father had been indicted for fraud. Others whispered about a tragic family feud. Isabelle's ears perked up, but she forced herself to remain discreet. The last thing she needed was to be caught eavesdropping. When the hostess approached, Isabelle found out that she'd be taking over a high-profile table for the evening, a special request from the client. "He specifically asked for you," the hostess said with a perplexed smile. "Said you came highly recommended by Karen Friedman." Isabelle's heart gave a jolt. Karen Friedman, renowned philanthropist and part owner of Le Palais Noir, rarely made direct table assignments unless she wanted to ensure top-notch service, or unless there was a hidden motive. Perplexed yet intrigued, Isabelle donned her best professional smile, grabbed her notepad, and headed toward the private alcove near the restaurant's towering wine cellar. She pulled aside the heavy velvet drapes and stepped in. That was when she laid eyes on Alexander Harrington for the very first time. Alexander Harrington was tall, with an elegant but understated sense of style. He wore a tailored navy suit that accentuated his lean frame, and the faint lines around his steel-grey eyes suggested both experience and a trace of sorrow. A subtle tension clung to him, a disquiet that belied his polished exterior. Beside him sat a second figure, an older woman with silver hair pinned in an immaculate chignon. Isabelle immediately recognized the woman as Linda Rosenthal, a high-profile investor often spotted at philanthropic galas. Alexander stood as Isabelle approached, inclining his head courteously. "Miss Reyes, is it?" he asked in a low, cultured voice. Surprised he knew her name, Isabelle nodded. He offered a faint smile. "Karen Friedman told me that if I wanted impeccable service and a discreet ear, I should specifically request you." Linda Rosenthal's gaze flicked between them, her expression revealing nothing. Isabelle could feel her cheeks warming, but she steadied her voice. "It's a pleasure to serve you both this evening, Mr. Harrington, Miss Rosenthal. May I start you off with a drink recommendation. Alexander glanced at Linda before answering. "Yes, please. Perhaps a glass of Chateau Margaux if you have it." He paused, then added softly, "And call me Alexander." Linda Rosenthal sipped water, giving Isabel a polite nod. "We'll share a bottle," she murmured. "Thank you." Isabel withdrew, her mind swirling. She had read about Linda Rosenthal in the business pages, her net worth, her pivotal deals, the philanthropic endeavors she shared with the Farnsworth and Whitmore families. But Alexander was a far murkier figure. While his name occasionally surfaced in tabloids or rumor mills, details of his wealth and how he'd acquired it remained fuzzy. Retrieving the wine from the cellar, Isabel couldn't help but think about how elegantly Alexander had spoken her name and how carefully he'd noted her presence. He wasn't the typical brash billionaire. Instead, he seemed guarded, almost weary. For a moment, she wondered, what had Karen Friedman told him about me? Friedman, after all, was known for her philanthropic connections. She also had a keen sense of people's strengths. Had she seen something in Isabel that might help Alexander? Once the wine was decanted and poured, Isabel set about taking their orders. Linda Rosenthal chose a seared foie gras appetizer, while Alexander opted for scallops drizzled with a delicate lemon beurre blanc. He studied the menu with a hint of distraction, glancing periodically at Linda as though weighing whether to speak. By the time Isabel left them to place the order, a palpable tension had descended on the table. She got the distinct impression that Linda was pressing Alexander on some urgent matter. The glimpses she caught tightly clenched hands, Linda's hushed admonitions hinted that the dinner might be more than a casual meet-up. Something serious hung in the air. Usually, Isabel tried not to linger near private conversations, but her innate curiosity prodded her to hover at a discreet distance, especially since Linda's voice had begun to rise, tense with emotion. "I'm telling you, Alexander," Linda was saying in a hushed but fervent tone, "if you don't come forward with your side of the story, they'll tear you apart in the media." The Farnsworth investigation is no joke. Alexander's reply was quiet, and Isabel only caught fragments. "No, but not yet. Father's involvement can't risk." Then Linda's voice, "You have no choice, or you'll risk everything: your legacy, your foundation, your entire fortune." Isabel's heart beat faster. Farnsworth investigation? Father's involvement? She knew of Christopher Farnsworth, an influential magnate, but also the Farnsworth family's track record in exposing financial corruption. Could Alexander be entangled in some corporate scandal? Trying to maintain a facade of normalcy, Isabel approached the table with fresh bread and herb butter. She felt both sets of eyes flick to her, conversation halting mid-sentence. Linda forced a polite smile, while Alexander's face remained impassive. "All is well?" Isabel asked softly. Alexander nodded, though the tension in his shoulders suggested otherwise. "Yes, thank you." He shifted, clearly eager for her to depart. She retreated, feeling a pang of guilt for prying, yet also propelled by the strange sense that this was more than a typical corporate meltdown. Something about Alexander's subdued bearing implied deeper wounds, emotional or moral scars that refused to heal. Back at the service station, she replayed their snippets of conversation in her head. Words like dark past, investigation, and father's involvement echoed ominously. She'd heard rumors about Alexander's father, George Harrington, being indicted years ago for some financial wrongdoing, only to vanish from the public eye. Perhaps this fiasco was a resurrection of that old scandal. Over the course of dinner, Alexander and Linda occasionally lapsed into anxious whispers, lowering their voices whenever Isabel neared. Still, she sensed Linda urging Alexander to make a decision. Judging by the tension lines etched in Linda's face, it wasn't going well. When dessert arrived, an intricately plated chocolate soufflé, Linda declined to taste more than a bite. claiming she had lost her appetite. Alexander also left his dish mostly untouched. Isabel could practically feel the weight of secrets suffocating the space. Finally, Linda rose to leave, pressing a bundle of documents into Alexander's hands. "Don't delay," she muttered. "We'll talk soon." With that, she swept out, leaving Alexander alone at the table, staring into his half-empty wineglass with a haunted expression. After Linda left, Isabel expected Alexander to settle his bill and depart swiftly. Instead, he lingered, absent-mindedly swirling the wine in his glass. Sensing an unspoken need, Isabel approached. "Would you care for anything else, Mr. Harrington?" she asked gently. He looked up, meeting her eyes as if noticing her for the first time that evening. The guarded lines of his face softened fractionally. "Actually," he said quietly, "another glass of wine might do." His tone carried a note of resignation, like a man perched on the edge of a precipice. Isabel refilled his glass, then took a small step back. "Should I give you some space?" she offered, unsure if he wanted solitude or company. Something in her voice seemed to prompt a faint, wry smile from him. "You don't have to." "Unless you're eager to clock out," he said. She glanced around. It was nearing midnight, and the restaurant had largely emptied, except for a few lingering patrons. The manager, Helen O'Leary, had given Isabel the nod to close out soon. She had no pressing obligations, just a curiosity that refused to let go. So she pulled up a nearby chair, normally a breach of protocol, but the restaurant was nearly deserted, and it seemed Alexander welcomed the conversation. "Is everything okay?" she ventured. He exhaled a short laugh, devoid of humor. "Is anything ever truly okay in this city?" He stared into his wineglass for a moment, before continuing in a low murmur. "I suppose you overheard Linda's concerns." Isabel hesitated, uncertain how honest to be. "A little, but it's not my place." He waved away her caution. "I'm sure you heard enough to guess something's awry. Let's just say there are old ghosts coming back to haunt me. My father's legacy is casting a long shadow." "Your father?" Isabel echoed carefully. "George Harrington?" Alexander nodded, gaze distant. "You've heard of him, I presume. Rumors swirl about his downfall, the hush-hush deals, the hush money. But no one knows the full truth. Not even me." In the low lamplight, Isabel noticed the strain in his features, like someone who'd carried a heavy burden for far too long. She felt an unexpected surge of sympathy. "I can't imagine how difficult that must be." Are you in danger?" He shrugged, a gesture that spoke volumes about resignation. "Perhaps. If not physical, then certainly social and financial. People think being a millionaire grants you invincibility, but it just paints a bigger target on your back. And Linda is right. I can't hide forever. Farnsworth's investigators are digging up old files about my father's business dealings. If they find something damning that implicates me, I could lose everything, even if I'm innocent of his sins." Isabel's mind whirled. She'd never sat with a wealthy patron who bared such vulnerability. Despite the secrecy swirling around him, Alexander exuded an odd sincerity that disarmed her. "Could you come forward with your truth?" she asked softly. "Maybe that's what Linda wants." He looked at her, eyes flicking over her face as though evaluating her trustworthiness. "She thinks it's best I preempt any allegations, provide my side before the media paints me as the villain. But the truth is, I'm not entirely sure what I'll find if I start digging into my father's records, or if I'll unearth something that forever changes how I see him and myself." Silence settled. Slowly, Alexander finished his wine and stood. "I'm sorry for burdening you with all this, especially at the end of your shift." Isabel shook her head. "No burden. I hope you find clarity, Mr. Harrington." He managed a small, tight smile. "Alexander, please." Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a business card. If you ever hear any chatter, or if Friedman mentions something you think I should know, give me a call. Isabel accepted the card, its expensive cardstock weighty between her fingers. She doubted she could be of much help, yet she found herself nodding. "I will," she promised. With that, Alexander Harrington slipped out of Le Palais Noir, stepping into the quiet New York night. Isabel watched him go, the business card clutched in her hand and 1,000 new questions swirling in her mind. The next day dawned crisp and cool. Isabel woke in her modest studio apartment, greeted by beams of pale morning light streaming through the thin curtains. She couldn't shake the lingering sense of intrigue from the night before. As she dressed in casual jeans and a sweater, she flipped on the local news, half listening for any mention of Alexander Harrington or Farnsworth. But the headlines covered only a mayoral scandal and a string of Broadway reviews. Nothing relevant. She had the day off, so she decided to visit the city library, an old, quiet building with vaulted ceilings and endless archives of newspapers. If Farnsworth was investigating some old scandal related to George Harrington, perhaps the answers lay in the dusty corners of public record. It didn't take long for her to find references to George Harrington. A quick search in the library's digital archive revealed a flurry of articles from nearly 15 years ago. Financier George Harrington indicted on fraud. Read one ominous headline. Another Harrington's mysterious disappearance leaves investors bereft. Isabel's pulse quickened. Reading on, she discovered that George Harrington had been accused of orchestrating a massive Ponzi scheme, funneling money through shell corporations before everything collapsed. The victims included major philanthropic organizations, some of which were connected to Karen Friedman and Linda Rosenthal. The scandal shook Manhattan's financial core, but before the case could go to trial, George Harrington vanished, rumored to have fled the country. No one knew if he was alive or dead. As for Alexander, the articles mentioned him in passing, a mere teenager at the time. Harrington's son was last seen departing their Park Avenue penthouse with his mother, rumored to be heading for Europe. That was it. No further detail. Isabel's heart panged with sympathy. If Alexander was that young when the scandal broke, he might have been shielded from the truth. No wonder he was uncertain about his father's secrets. Still, Farnsworth's new investigation implied there might be fresh evidence linking Alexander to the old crimes, maybe an inheritance gleaned from illicit funds or unreported accounts. Before leaving, Isabel printed the articles, stuffing them into a folder. She felt a swirl of guilt. Was this any of her business? Technically, no. But she couldn't shake a sense of responsibility after Alexander had confided in her, if only briefly. If there was a clue that might help him navigate this minefield, maybe she could find it. That evening, Isabel attended a charity gala hosted by Karen Friedman. Normally she'd be working at Le Palais Noir, but Friedman had insisted she help with event coordination. Friedman's personal invitation was an honor Isabel couldn't refuse, given Friedman's influence and the respect she commanded. The venue was a restored Art Deco ballroom on the Upper East Side, filled with glittering chandeliers, lively orchestras, and well-heeled guests milling around. Isabel wore a simple black cocktail dress, her hair in a sleek chignon. She felt a bit out of place among the socialites in their designer gowns, but Friedman had assured her that her presence was valuable. Early in the night, as Isabel hovered near the silent auction table, she spotted Linda Rosenthal speaking with Gerald Whitmore, another big name in philanthropic circles. Slipping closer under the pretext of adjusting a flower arrangement, Isabel overheard Linda mention Alexander Harrington and family assets. Her ears perked. "We must handle this carefully," Linda told Gerald. "Alexander claims ignorance, but Farnsworth is convinced there's a hidden trust or something linking him to the scandal. If Alexander won't produce a thorough accounting, Farnsworth's investigators will assume the worst. Gerald Whitmore nodded gravely. I've known Alexander for a while. His mother was a dear friend. This could ruin him if he doesn't come clean soon. But the question is, does he even have the documents Farnsworth wants? Linda sipped champagne. He may not, or he may be too afraid to look. But Farnsworth is giving him an ultimatum. Isabel's pulse raced. This was bigger than she'd imagined. If Farnsworth demanded documents proving Alexander's innocence, and Alexander failed to comply, they'd assume he was complicit. She recalled his haunted expression at the restaurant. He was indeed trapped. A sudden movement behind her startled Isabel. Karen Friedman stood nearby, wearing a fitted burgundy gown, her keen eyes flicking from the flowers to Isabel's tense posture. "You're concerned about Alexander Harrington, aren't you?" Friedman said, not bothering with pleasantries. Isabel flushed. Well, he confided in me the other night. I overheard Miss Rosenthal now, too." Friedman sighed, taking Isabel by the elbow and steering her away from the crowd. "My dear, you have a good heart, but Alexander's situation is complex. Farnsworth invests heavily in philanthropic endeavors. He won't allow scandal to tarnish those efforts. If Alexander can't prove he wasn't enriched by his father's crimes, Farnsworth will bury him." Isabel's voice trembled. "But what if he really doesn't know where his father's money went?" Friedman nodded thoughtfully. "Then he's in trouble. You see, Linda and I both want to help him, but Farnsworth is beyond reason if he suspects wrongdoing. You might be the only neutral party in Alexander's orbit. Perhaps that's why I suggested he seek you out." Isabel's chest tightened. Friedman's eyes were kind yet resolute. "If you do learn anything, any detail that might exonerate him, bring it to me or Linda immediately," Friedman said softly. "We can't let Farnsworth tear down an innocent man." With that, Friedman left to greet donors, leaving Isabel reeling with a strange mixture of responsibility and dread. She had unwittingly stepped into a labyrinth of high-stakes intrigue. If Alexander's innocence depended on unearthing long-buried truths, was Isabel truly equipped to help? After the gala ended, Isabel slipped outside, exhausted by the swirl of small talk and tension. She loitered near the curb, waiting for a taxi. The night air was brisk against her bare arms. As she checked her phone for ride-share options, a voice hissed from behind her. "Looking for Harrington, are you?" She whirled around to see a gaunt, middle-aged man in a threadbare coat, lurking in the shadows of the building's side alley. His unkempt hair and hollow cheeks gave him a desperate look. Isabel's heart hammered. "Excuse me," she managed. The man sneered, stepping into the faint glow of a nearby lamppost. "I saw you inside, talking with Friedman, eavesdropping on Rosenthal. You want to help Harrington dodge Farnsworth's bullets, yes?" Isabel took a step back, adrenaline kicking in. "I don't know what you're talking about," he chuckled, low and mirthless. "I used to work for Harrington's father, George. I know things, and I can see your curiosity. Maybe you want a clue, yes?" Her fear tangled with intrigue. "Why would you tell me anything?" He shrugged. "Because Farnsworth's people are sniffing around. They've approached me. I can't stand them. But maybe I'd rather see Harrington prove his innocence. George was the real snake, not the boy." His eyes glinted. "I have a lead on an old safe deposit box George kept. Rumor is it contains the real documents, proof that the money was stolen, or maybe proof that it wasn't. Hard to say." Isabel stared at the man, her heart pounding. This was either a trap or a break. "Why are you telling me?" she asked quietly. "I'm just a waitress." He let out a rasping laugh. "No, you're Friedman's little protege, and Harrington trusts you, so if you want to clear his name, find that box." He scribbled something on a scrap of paper and tossed it at her feet. Address of the old bank in New Jersey, box number, keys probably with Harrington or hidden among his father's possessions. Before she could say another word, the man turned and scurried down the alley. Isabel bent to pick up the paper. She felt a chill crawl up her spine. This was exactly the kind of clandestine tip that could either solve the mystery or plunge her and Alexander deeper into danger. She jammed the note into her purse, her mind whirling with the ramifications. If the deposit box truly existed, it might hold the proof Farnsworth needed to see Alexander's innocence. But how to bring it up to Alexander without sounding insane? Steeling herself, she hailed a taxi. She wouldn't rest until she found a way to help. For reasons she could scarcely articulate, her instinct told her Alexander deserved the chance to fight for his future. And something else, some deeper empathy, urged her onward. The next day, Isabel texted Alexander, asking if they could meet. He suggested a discreet cafe on the edge of Central Park, away from the usual upscale spots. Late in the afternoon, she arrived to find him waiting at a corner table, wearing a simple black turtleneck and jeans, as if trying to camouflage himself among ordinary New Yorkers. She slid into the seat opposite him, feeling her pulse quicken. "Thank you for coming," she said. He studied her face, concern etched in his own. "You sounded urgent. Is everything all right?" Isabel took a deep breath and retrieved the crumpled note from her purse. "I was approached by someone last night after Friedman's gala. He said he used to work for your father. He mentioned a safe deposit box in a New Jersey bank. Box number included." Alexander's brow furrowed. "Safe deposit box?" He glanced at the note, reading the address and number. "I've never heard of this. My father never spoke of anything like it." His eyes flicked up, searching Isabel's. "You're sure this man was legit?" She hesitated. "No, but the details seemed specific, and he recognized me from Friedman's event. He claimed Farnsworth's people approached him to testify. If Farnsworth believes there's a hidden stash of documents, that could be the key to proving your innocence. Or condemning you." Alexander leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "So either the box holds exonerating evidence, or it proves my father's guilt, and by extension, that I benefited from it." Isabel softened her voice. "We won't know unless we open it. But you need the key. The man mentioned it might be among your father's possessions." A flicker of pain crossed Alexander's face. "My father's possessions? I have them, ironically. They were turned over to me last year when he was declared legally dead, though no body was ever found. Most of it I couldn't bear to look at. Old letters, pictures, some worthless trinkets. He paused, swallowing. "I'll search them." They lapsed into silence, the weight of potential revelations pressing down on them. A server approached, dropping off 2 coffees. Alexander absently pushed his aside. Finally, he looked at Isabel, a trace of desperation in his eyes. "Will you help me go through his things?" I can't do it alone." Her heart squeezed with empathy. "Of course," she said gently. She saw how isolated he felt, carrying this legacy alone. In that moment, it ceased to be about her curiosity or Friedman's request. It was about helping a man who was trapped by the shadow of a father's sins. They arranged to meet at Alexander's penthouse the following evening to search. As they parted, Alexander's expression hovered between gratitude and fear. "Thank you, Isabel," he whispered, before disappearing into the crowd. Alexander's penthouse perched atop a venerable pre-war building overlooking Park Avenue. A doorman ushered Isabel inside, and she rode a private elevator to the top floor. When the doors slid open, she stepped into a foyer that combined classic architecture with modern elegance, marble floors, vaulted ceilings, and minimalist decor that hinted at a refined taste. Alexander greeted her, his demeanor subdued. "Thank you for coming," he said. He led her down a corridor into a spacious living room with floor-to-ceiling windows. The view of Manhattan's skyline was breathtaking, but Isabel's attention zeroed in on the clutter spread across a wide mahogany table near the bookshelves, dusty photo albums, battered notebooks, and old keepsakes that likely belonged to George Harrington. "I started pulling things out," Alexander said, gesturing to the items, "but I didn't want to rummage alone. Isabel gently placed her purse on a nearby chair. "Let's see what we can find." They began sifting through the paraphernalia. Photo albums depicted Alexander as a child, smiling widely at beach vacations and holiday gatherings, always overshadowed by a tall, stern-looking man with an enigmatic gaze. George Harrington. Isabel noted the father's powerful frame, the unyielding set of his jaw. He looked like a man who thrived on control. Letters emerged, some personal notes from business associates, some half-written drafts of statements that never made sense. As they leafed through them, Alexander's mood grew heavier, as if each piece of paper carried a ghost of memory. 2 hours passed, and frustration mounted. Aside from glimpses of a complicated man, there was no sign of a small key or any mention of a safe deposit box. Isabel worried this was all a dead end. Then, beneath a pile of old receipts, she found a worn, leather-bound journal. "Alexander," she said, handing it to him. "This looks personal." He opened it gingerly. The first page revealed entries in George's neat handwriting, referencing meetings, stock tips, and cryptic phrases about overseas accounts. Occasionally, there were mentions of the box. Each time, the tone was anxious, as though George feared its discovery. "There," Isabel said, pointing to a particular note. "Ensure the key remains hidden. If something befalls me, Alexander must know the truth." Alexander's hands trembled. "He wrote that?" His eyes scanned the page, jumping to a scribbled margin note, "Key concealed behind mother's portrait." A shock coursed through Isabel. "Your mother's portrait? Do you have one?" Alexander's gaze flickered, memories stirring. "We had a painting of her in our old home in Connecticut. After father disappeared, the painting was stored in a climate-controlled warehouse, along with other family antiques." He set the journal down, his breath unsteady. "I never thought to look behind it. This must be where the key is." Their eyes locked. Isabel saw relief warring with dread in his expression. If the key existed, it might finally crack open the secret deposit box. And that, in turn, might either redeem Alexander or seal his fate. "Tomorrow," he said, trying to sound decisive, "we'll drive to the warehouse and retrieve the painting. Will you come?" "Yes," she murmured. "I'll be there." Early the next morning, Alexander picked Isabel up in a sleek, unassuming sedan far from the ostentatious vehicles many millionaires favored. They left Manhattan behind, the city's skyline shrinking in the rearview mirror as they headed north toward Connecticut's leafy suburbs. Conversation was subdued, the gravity of their mission loomed large. After an hour's drive, they arrived at a nondescript storage facility nestled behind tall hedges. Alexander typed in a security code at the gate, and they drove through. He led her to a private warehouse unit lined with crates and tarps covering old furniture, decorative items, and a few paintings stacked carefully against a wall. "There," Alexander said, pointing to a large canvas draped in cloth. He pulled back the covering, revealing a haunting portrait of a woman with gentle eyes and wavy dark hair pinned in a classic style. Isabel recognized the grace in her features, the quiet strength in her gaze. "That's my mother, Celeste Harrington," Alexander said softly. "She died of an illness when I was 16, just a couple of years before my father's indictment." He gazed at the portrait with a sorrow that transcended words. With trembling hands, he carefully lifted the painting from its resting place. Isabel joined him, and they placed it on a nearby table. She gently felt along the frame's edges, searching for any hidden compartment. At last, her fingertips encountered a small bump at the painting's backing. She pressed it, and part of the backing slid away, revealing a tiny alcove. Inside lay a small envelope and, more importantly, a tarnished brass key. Alexander's breath caught. He picked up the key as if it might burn him. "This must be it," he whispered. The envelope contained a short note. "Alexander, if you are reading this, it means something has happened." Please know I did what I had to do for our family. The deposit box will explain everything. Forgive me, Father. Emotion choked Alexander's words. Isabel placed a hand on his shoulder. This is our chance, she murmured. We go to the bank and open that box. Then we'll know what Farnsworth might find and how to defend you. He nodded, swallowing hard. Let's do it. They carefully repacked the painting and locked up the warehouse. While driving away, Isabel sensed Alexander's turmoil. He had lost both parents at a young age, endured a scandal's fallout, and now was about to uncover secrets that could redefine his entire life. She squeezed his hand, a silent gesture of solidarity. He nodded, grateful for her presence, an anchor in the storm. The New Jersey bank was located in a sleepy suburban town, far from Manhattan's bustle. A modest brick building with a discreet sign, Hudson Valley Trust. It seemed an unlikely setting for high-stakes drama. Inside, the cool hush of the lobby enveloped them as they approached a uniformed clerk behind a walnut desk. Alexander showed identification and the key. The clerk, eyebrows slightly arched at the old key's design, led them into a secure area with rows of small metal drawers. Box 311, the clerk announced, guiding them to a quiet corner. Alexander hesitated, then inserted the key into the lock. A soft click, he slid the metal box from its slot and carried it to a nearby private viewing room. Isabel's heart pounded as he lifted the lid. Inside were neatly folded documents, a few computer disks, and a sealed manila envelope. Alexander exhaled, picking up a packet of papers. Scanning the first page, he froze. These are financial ledgers, accounts under my father's name, offshore transactions. It looks damning. Isabel's pulse quickened. Damning to your father, or to you. He rifled through more sheets, eyebrows knitting in confusion. It seems to detail the movement of funds from investors' money into certain shell companies. But look here, there's a final ledger entry that suggests he tried to return some funds at the last minute. It's contradictory. Then he opened the manila envelope. Out tumbled a letter with Alexander scrawled across the front. He read it aloud in a trembling voice. My son, you must hate me for the scandal, for all I put you through. But the truth is, I discovered the fraud too late. My partner, Ronald Kincaid, orchestrated the Ponzi scheme. When I tried to correct it, he threatened our family. I moved the funds offshore to keep them away from him and hoped to restore them to the rightful owners. But I never got the chance. If something happens to me, these records prove I intended to repay every cent. Protect yourself and do not trust Kincaid or Farnsworth. They are entangled. Farther shocked silence followed. Isabel processed the revelation. Christopher Farnsworth, was part of the old guard of investors. Could he have known Ronald Kincaid? Was Farnsworth truly seeking justice, or was he hiding his own complicity? Alexander closed his eyes, as though the weight of years crashed upon him. So father wasn't the sole mastermind. He tried to fix it, and Farnsworth might be covering for the real villain. That's huge. Isabel's mind spun. If Farnsworth was complicit, he'd have every motive to bury Alexander before the truth emerged. That explained the relentless investigation. This changes everything, she breathed. But just then, the door to the viewing room swung open. Two men in suits barged in, tall, stern-faced, and obviously not bank employees. One pinned Isabel with a cold stare, the other glared at Alexander. "We need those documents," one barked, brandishing a badge. "FBI. Hand them over now, or we'll arrest you for obstructing an official investigation." Alexander exchanged a panicked look with Isabel. FBI, or Farnsworth's hired guns masquerading as law enforcement. This was the moment that would decide their fate. Instinct kicked in. Isabel grabbed the letter and documents, shoving them into her purse as the men lunged forward. Alexander, reacting in a heartbeat, yanked a metal chair in their path. "Run!" he shouted, grabbing Isabel's hand. She sprinted alongside him, heart hammering as they burst out of the private room into the bank's main corridor. The startled clerk hollered, "What's going on?" But they couldn't stop to explain. The two pursuers gave chase, footsteps pounding on the polished floor. Alexander and Isabel dashed through a side exit marked "Employees Only." They found themselves in a narrow hallway leading to a service door. Lockers and supplies cluttered the walls. Isabel's mind screamed with adrenaline. If these men truly had FBI badges, they'd have backup. But something about their aggression, no official procedure, no reading of rights, reeked of subterfuge. They burst through the service door into a rear parking lot. Overhead, storm clouds gathered, threatening rain. The men emerged seconds later, shouting orders. Spotting Alexander's sedan across the lot, they sprinted toward it. Miraculously, the men must have parked out front, giving Alexander a precious head start. He unlocked the car with shaking hands, and they both dove inside. Isabel's breath came in gasps as she clutched the purse. Alexander started the engine, tires screeching as they peeled out onto the street. In the rear-view mirror, she glimpsed their pursuers cursing, powerless to stop them. A block away, they merged into traffic. Isabel's pulse refused to slow. "What just happened?" she gasped. Were they really FBI? Or Farnsworth's men? Alexander's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. No real FBI agent would skip protocol like that. Farnsworth must have powerful connections. He doesn't want these documents seeing daylight. They drove in tense silence for miles, winding back toward Manhattan. Only after crossing the state line did Isabel dare speak again. "We have the proof. Your father wasn't the sole culprit. Farnsworth's involvement with Kincaid might be the real reason he's investigating. He wants to bury the truth." Alexander's face was grim. "Then we need allies who can protect us. Linda Rosenthal, Karen Friedman, they might be able to help, but Farnsworth's reach is vast. We have to be careful." Finally, they arrived at Alexander's penthouse. As they hurried upstairs, Isabel felt numb. So many secrets unraveling at once. Her ordinary life had just taken a violent turn. Yet she held on to the documents with fierce determination. If Farnsworth's men wanted them, it meant those pages could expose a massive conspiracy. That knowledge made her both terrified and resolute. Once inside the penthouse, they locked the door, double-checked the security system, and collapsed on a couch. Rain pattered against the panoramic windows, mirroring the storm in their lives. Alexander poured them each a stiff drink. His hands shook as he handed Isabel a tumbler of whiskey. "Thank you," he murmured, voice thick with exhaustion. "You risked so much for me. I can't ask you to keep doing this." She cut him off gently. "You didn't ask. I volunteered. I believe you deserve a chance to clear your name. And," she paused, searching his eyes, "and I care." A flicker of gratitude lit his weary gaze. He sipped his whiskey, as if steeling himself for the next step. "We should contact Linda Rosenthal. She can set up a meeting with Friedman. Show them the documents. They'll know how to handle Farnsworth's influence." Isabel nodded, retrieving her phone. She found Linda Rosenthal's contact, one of the only times she was glad to have snagged a wealthy client's number from Friedman's gala list. She texted Linda a cryptic message. "We have critical evidence Harrington's father. Need urgent meeting. Please advise." They waited, tension mounting, until Linda finally replied, "Meet me at Friedman's private club, 10 a.m. tomorrow. Bring the docs." Discretion is paramount. Relief warred with anxiety. They had a plan, but Farnsworth's men were likely on the prowl. Alexander insisted Isabel stay at his penthouse overnight, fearing she could be followed or threatened if she went home alone. She reluctantly agreed returning to her apartment might compromise her safety. That night, they tried to rest in separate guest rooms, but sleep eluded Isabel. She felt haunted by the memory of those men barging into the bank. She also wrestled with a surge of unexpected feelings for Alexander, admiration for his quiet strength, empathy for his haunted past, and a protective urge that she'd never known before. In the dark hours, she crept into the living room, finding Alexander similarly awake, standing by the window with a faraway look. He turned as she approached, and for a moment, neither spoke. Then, in a gesture of comfort, she slipped her arms around him. He pulled her close, his breath ragged with unspoken fears. The city lights glowed beneath them, a testament to a world that never slept, much like their racing minds. Morning arrived under a grey sky, the clouds heavy with lingering threat. Alexander and Isabel dressed in subdued attire, he in a tailored charcoal suit, she in a simple black blazer over a white blouse. The documents were secured in a sleek briefcase. They left the penthouse carefully, scanning the street for suspicious cars or watchers, then took a taxi to Friedman's private club, a stately brick building hidden behind tall hedges on the Upper East Side. Inside, plush carpets muffled their footsteps as they walked down a corridor of polished wood paneling and antique sconces. Linda Rosenthal greeted them in a luxurious sitting room with a discreet fireplace. Karen Friedman was there too, along with a tall man in his 60s, Gerald Whitmore, a well-known philanthropic titan. They all wore grave expressions. After brief pleasantries, Linda gestured for them to sit. "Show us what you found," she said, her tone urgent. Alexander set the briefcase on a mahogany coffee table and withdrew the documents, the ledgers, the letter from George, and other incriminating details about Ronald Kincaid. Linda's eyes widened as she skimmed the pages. Friedman pressed her lips in a tight line, and Whitmore frowned deeply. "This implies Farnsworth and Kincaid were not just passive investors," Friedman said, flipping through the ledgers. "They orchestrated much of it and pinned the blame on George Harrington. He tried to fix it but vanished before he could clear his name." Gerald Whitmore rumbled, "If Farnsworth is complicit, he'll stop at nothing to keep this hidden. The question is how to use these documents without endangering Alexander or ourselves." Linda nodded, setting down the pages. "We have to be strategic. If we release this publicly, Farnsworth might spin it as false. His power is enormous. But if we present it to the right authorities with evidence of Farnsworth's intimidation tactics, we could force an investigation." Isabel, summoning courage, spoke up. "We were attacked at the bank by men claiming to be FBI. That could be Farnsworth's attempt to seize the documents illegally. If we can prove that, it's further evidence of corruption." Karen Friedman's jaw set. "Then we must secure these documents with real law enforcement allies. I know a federal prosecutor, Michael Gerritsen, who despises corporate corruption. He's been wanting Farnsworth for years, but never had a smoking gun." Alexander's eyes lit with hope. "So we let Gerritsen handle this?" Friedman nodded firmly. "Yes, we'll arrange a secure handover. And I'll ensure the press gets the right narrative." George tried to rectify the fraud. Farnsworth and Kincaid were the real architects. Linda touched Alexander's arm gently. "Are you ready for the backlash? Farnsworth will go down swinging, and you'll be thrust into a media storm." He drew a shaky breath. Glancing at Isabel, he seemed to find resolve in her presence. "I'm ready. I won't hide anymore." Gerald Whitmore cracked a small, reassuring smile. "Good man. You'll have our support. Let Farnsworth meet his reckoning." They made plans to meet the prosecutor that evening. Isabel breathed a silent prayer of relief. If all went well, Alexander would finally be free of his father's ominous legacy. Plans rarely go smoothly when billions of dollars and powerful reputations are at stake. Word leaked that Friedman and Rosenthal were backing Alexander Harrington's bid for vindication. Perhaps Farnsworth caught wind through his extensive network. Within hours of leaving the private club, Friedman called Alexander in a panic. "Farnsworth just publicly accused you of hiding illicit funds. The media is swirling. He's trying to bury you before we can reveal the truth." Sure enough, by late afternoon, major financial news outlets were blaring headlines. Alexander Harrington, under new fraud allegations. Farnsworth demands accountability. Talking heads on cable channels speculated about Alexander's alleged secret accounts, painting him as a cunning heir continuing his father's crimes. Alexander's phone buzzed relentlessly with calls from reporters. Paparazzi swarmed outside his penthouse. Isabel watched him pace, phone in hand, face drawn with worry. "He's moving faster than we anticipated," she murmured. A call from Friedman provided a sliver of hope. "We still meet Gerritsen tonight." Once the real story is out, Farnsworth's allegations will fall apart. But Friedman warned them not to return home or move about publicly. Farnsworth's men could be tailing them. Thus, Alexander and Isabel found refuge in a secure suite Friedman, arranged at a boutique hotel under a false name. Dim evening light filtered through heavy curtains as they awaited the moment to slip out and meet Gerritsen. Each passing minute felt like an hour, the tension acute. Why is Farnsworth so desperate? Isabel wondered aloud. If your father was the scapegoat, Farnsworth could have let it lie. Why stir up new accusations? Alexander rubbed his temples. He must know we have evidence that implicates him. He's trying to crush me before I can speak. If I'm discredited as a fraudster, the public won't believe anything I present. She nodded grimly. We just have to hold out until we see Gerritsen. Finally, Friedman texted, "We have a safe route. Linda will pick you up in 5 minutes." They gathered the documents, double-checking they had everything. Alexander cast a final glance around the hotel suite. "Let's end this." Linda Rosenthal arrived as promised, driving a nondescript sedan herself rather than using a chauffeur. She whisked them through back streets, avoiding main avenues. Tension coiled in the car. Linda's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "We can't fail now," she muttered. They reached a discreet office building in Midtown, where Friedman and Gerald Whitmore waited with Michael Gerritsen, the federal prosecutor. Gerritsen was a tall, authoritative man with graying hair and eyes that shone with keen intelligence. Alexander laid out the documents in a conference room. Gerritsen combed through them with quiet intensity. "This is substantial," he said, tapping the final ledger entries. "And the letter from George Harrington indicates Farnsworth's involvement with Kincaid. If these documents check out, and I believe they do, we have enough to launch an indictment." Relief pulsed through the group. Friedman placed a hand on Alexander's shoulder. "It'll be a storm, but we'll weather it together." At that moment, a junior staffer rushed in, pale-faced. "Mr. Gerritsen, Farnsworth's lawyers are on the phone, demanding an immediate conference." Gerritsen gave a mirthless chuckle. He must have found out I'm involved. Too late for him now. He eyed Alexander. "We'll coordinate a formal press briefing. I'll see to your legal protection once the public learns. Farnsworth is under investigation. His smear campaign loses potency." Isabel's eyes glimmered with tears. It was over, or at least the hardest part. She glanced at Alexander, who looked dazed yet relieved. He lifted his gaze toward her, and in that quiet exchange, she sensed the gravity of all they'd overcome. "Thank you," Alexander whispered. "Thank you, all of you." Linda gave him a smile. "We believed in you. Your father's secrets no longer define you. You can step into your own future." Gerritsen stepped out to make official calls. Friedman and Whitmore followed, leaving Alexander and Isabel momentarily alone. He took her hands. "I don't know how to repay you for everything you've done, for believing in me." She shook her head, voice trembling with relief and emotion. "No repayment needed. You opened up your life, your vulnerabilities, and I just wanted to help." He leaned in, pressing his forehead gently against hers, as though finally allowing himself a moment of tenderness amid the chaos. Outside, the swirl of attorneys and investigators signaled a coming war of legal battles. But inside that conference room, a quiet sense of hope blossomed. Within days, the media narrative shifted dramatically. Gerritson's office publicly announced a probe into Farnsworth's business dealings in connection with the old Harrington scandal. They confirmed they possessed documents indicating Farnsworth had colluded with Ronald Kincaid to embezzle investor funds. Suddenly, Farnsworth found himself on the defensive. No longer able to paint Alexander as the criminal, Farnsworth retreated from the spotlight. His legal team scrambled to control the damage, but Friedman, Linda Rosenthal, and Whitmore leveraged their influence to ensure the truth went mainstream. George Harrington, though not entirely innocent, had attempted to rectify the fraud, and his son, Alexander, was an unwitting victim who had no knowledge of the illegal funds. Paparazzi still swarmed, but this time they shouted questions about Farnsworth's downfall, not Alexander's guilt. Within a week, Farnsworth resigned from several board positions. Kincaid, cornered, reportedly fled the country. Alexander, relieved yet exhausted, held a press conference to clear his name, flanked by Friedman and Linda. He explained the inherited scandal, the deposit box discovery, and the father's letter. The public, swayed by the evidence, offered cautious sympathy. Alexander vowed to channel his wealth into ethical investments and philanthropic work, hoping to atone for the damage left by his family's complicated legacy. Isabel watched from the sidelines, heart swelling with pride. The once reclusive millionaire now stood before cameras as a figure of resilience, determined to carve out a new legacy. And she, an ordinary waitress, had played a part in his redemption. A month after the dust began to settle, Alexander invited Isabel to accompany him to a philanthropic event at Le Palais Noir, the very restaurant where their paths first crossed. Friedman and Linda were hosting a charity dinner, raising funds for small businesses displaced by corporate corruption. In a neat twist of fate, Alexander was the evening's special guest, delivering a speech about transparency and second chances. Standing together at the edge of the dining room, Isabel and Alexander gazed across the crowd. The same chandeliers sparkled overhead, the same plush banquets lined the walls, yet everything felt different. Alexander, no longer shadowed by guilt, radiated a calm confidence. Isabel, no longer just a server, stood proudly beside him as a respected figure in Friedman's circle, someone who had proven her tenacity and integrity. He squeezed her hand, leaning in to murmur, "You changed my life, Isabel. I'd be lost if it weren't for you." She turned, meeting his gaze with a soft smile. "And you changed mine. I never knew how fulfilling it could be to stand up for someone and to truly make a difference." From across the room, Friedman caught their eyes, lifting her glass in a silent toast. Linda Rosenthal and Gerald Whitmore stood beside her, nodding in approval. They were the allies who had believed in Alexander when the city's rumor mill threatened to devour him. As the evening progressed, Alexander took the stage. Applause rippled through the crowd. In a sincere, steady voice, he spoke of lessons learned about family, responsibility, and forging a future unshackled by the past. He vowed to fund initiatives that promoted ethical business practices and to champion legislation that punished corporate malfeasance. When he finished, the audience rose to give a standing ovation. Cameras flashed, yet Alexander's eyes sought only Isabel's. She felt her heart swell with admiration. Indeed, behind the millionaire's stoic facade lay a true heart softened by tragedy, shaped by adversity, and ultimately guided by empathy. Later, they slipped out to the quiet alcove near the wine cellar, where they first shared that charged moment of truth. Gently, he pulled her into an embrace. "No matter what the future holds," he murmured, "I want you by my side." She tilted her face up to his. "I'm not going anywhere." In that tender promise, they sealed the final chapter of a dark past and opened the first page of a shared future. A waitress had uncovered a millionaire's secrets, and in doing so, discovered his genuine soul. No longer haunted by old scandals, they stepped forward together, bound by a bond forged in the crucible of danger, courage, and love. Alexander Harrington's journey proves that even the darkest secrets can be confronted, and that the human heart, when given a chance, can reveal unexpected depths of honesty and kindness. For too long, the shadows of his father's scandal and Farnsworth's manipulations threatened to destroy him, but a single waitress's compassion and determination paved the way for redemption. Through high-stakes chases, secret deposit boxes, and perilous showdowns, Alexander and Isabel emerged stronger and closer, forging a bond that transcended wealth or status. Yet their story is also a reminder our legacies don't have to define us. We can choose to break free from the chains of the past, stand for truth, and create a brighter tomorrow. If this story inspired you, if you felt every twist and turn, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Help us continue bringing you captivating real-life drama fiction where heartfelt acts of courage can triumph over the toughest trials. Thank you for watching. And remember, sometimes the simplest kindness can shine the brightest light into the darkest secrets.